What up, people? So in this video, I'm just gonna run you through my recording template. Just gonna show you some basic things in terms of setting up your recording session. Um, you probably might know a lot of these things already, but if not, it's good. These are just a lot of basic things that will help you in your workflow while you're going through, recording your session. And that's why we use templates a lot. Um, it just helps with workflow, being able to get to things in a faster manner and a more efficient manner. So what I'm gonna do is just basically run you through my recording template. I have a lot of people who use my template, and it works wonderfully for them. And then when they're ready to send the session to get mixed, um, if they want to go that route, it's super easy for me to bring it in and import whatever other things I might need to import. Um, but I'm gonna make this available for download for $15.99 on my website. Um, Feel free to ask me any questions if you have anything that doesn't make any sense. But I'm just gonna try to run you through everything, and hopefully everything works smoothly for you. So first things first, basic thing with your mic setup. Uh, Most engineers do this. I like to do this. Um, what I do is I'll set up my mic through an auxiliary input. So here you'll see the input is blanked out because I'm using a different uh, interface to record this tutorial. But first thing you're going to want to do is set your input, whatever your input you use, input one, input two, whatever the case may be. You're going to want to set your input, um, obviously a mono auxiliary, and then we're going to create um, a bus. The output is going to be a bus, and we're going to label that bus mic. So we have output mono mic, and then what we do is we'll put on each track that we have set up for our recording, we're going to choose that same bus on the input. Um, so on everything on the input on all of these tracks here, lead one, lead two, you'll see it is coming from the mic bus. So what that does is that just enables us to get to recording quickly and in an efficient manner. Also, what I have set up is a PAS analyzer. Um, Side note, the only two plugin bundles that you'll need for this are Waves and McDSP. I'm sure most people have Waves, um, and McDSP is not, they're not hard to find. Um, but I'd highly suggest, if you don't have McDSP plugins, get them. They're great. They have a lot of great EQs. Their EQs are beautiful. Um, but a lot of good stuff in the McDSP package. Um, but here on this mic input, I have a PAS analyzer. And this is just so I can see the input coming in. I can be able to see if there's any problems. Sometimes there might not be anybody in the booth, and you might see some a buzz or a hiss going on. It kind of lets you to see some stuff that you might not be able to recognize in a loud studio if you have a whole bunch of people in a control room. Um, just gives you another visual aid, as well as using your ears to see what's going on with the material that you're recording. Um, so um, from there, after we have our mic set, uh, the first thing we're going to be doing most likely is bringing in the instrumental or the beat that the person is recording to. Um, Obviously, this is a more of a hip hop R&B template setup, for somebody who's recording to a 2-track or an instrumental that's already been bounced. So here you'll see we already have the 2-track labeled, and you can just easily just drag and drop your 2 track or your instrumental there. Um, I have a instrumental that we can use for reference. I got a couple of beats or whatever. We just picked whatever one's highlighted. All right. So a lot of times, obviously, this beat has the tempo attached to it. A lot of times, you'll get an instrumental and it won't have the tempo attached to it, so you'll have to manually find it and put it in. I know some people like to use Beat Detective or something else. I really don't like those. They always give you some, it's usually off, but um, if you're going to manually put it in, which I recommend, um, I'll show you um, how to how to find the tempo, because that's very important in regards to your workflow, to be able to copy and paste stuff easily. Once you have the tempo mapped in into your session, you'll be able to not only, you know, cut and paste stuff, like if you have a chorus or a hook that you need to fly over after the first verse, whatever the case may be. Now you have a grid attached and it makes it easy so you can put everything on time. And also, it'll automatically put all your delays on time. Um, Most delay plugins, when they come in, uh, they usually automatically sync to the tempo of the session, and if not, they have indicator on there or some kind of thing that allows you to automatically link to the tempo of the session. So in this case, we can see the tempo is 97 BPM here. Um, But what I'll do is I'll show you how I go about finding a tempo if I don't know the BPM. Now, obviously, when we look at this waveform here, you can see some of the transients, and you can kind of see where the drums are coming in. If you see over here in this area right here, you can see that's where the drums first come in. My suggestion into finding the tempo is to go to the first pattern of drums where you see the drums come in, because that's the most notable transient pattern um, that you can find. So what I do is I'll take the I'll take the instrumental and drag it the whole way there, and all right, so obviously the kick comes in right there. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna drag it to right when the kick starts, and then we're gonna bring it the whole way back, and then we're gonna tap in the tempo. All right. All right. So now once I got it brought the whole way back, um, one thing that I do, usually when I set my tempo, I set it double time. This just makes it a lot easier for me, and it's for me. I think it's just a better way to work. I feel like it allows you to be a little bit more surgical uh, when you're going about editing certain parts. So we see that the kick comes in right away, obviously. Now, what I always do in terms of finding the tempo is once I have the kick set, I look for where the snare comes in. And I know the snare should always fall on the second line right here. And from there, um, that's usually around where it's at, and I can fine tune it in. So we see where that snare hits that, and then we're gonna tap over here. We're gonna bring the tempo down until that snare falls on that second line. Bam. And it should fall on every single time. You should see it like that. And I also have a click track set up in the template so you can easily, you know, see if, your tempo is falling in line as it should be. So usually what I like to do to check the tempo, once I feel like I got it set, is I usually go to later on in somewhere in the instrumental, and I'll play it just to make sure it's still on time. Because sometimes you might get a instrumental from somebody, and the producer wants to put a lot of decimal places and just make it like 0.535, or I've had stuff like that before. So in that case, you're gonna want to be able to see if it's the tempo is still falling in line later on in the song. So we're gonna give it a listen. All right. So now that we got the tempo set, you should be ready to record. Um, just drag it back, obviously. Um, so what I'll do is I'll just kind of run you through some of the basics here that I, you know, have set up for this template. There's a vocal rider on here, on these inputs. I would advise you to not go too heavy with this. Um, I have it set at a very narrow range. Um, if you don't know how to use vocal rider, don't use it. It's not something that you have to use. Um, and actually, when I open the template, it's usually inactive because I rarely use it. But sometimes it's a good thing to use because I don't like to record with a lot of compression. A lot of times I record with no compression. And that's just because I like to be able to have it uh, open for later in the recording or in the mix process. So I have that option of how much compression I want to use, and you can always send it back out. Um, you know, you can always send the signal back out into whatever compressor that you're using, and compress uh, that way. So for me, that mentality gives you more flexibility. Um, Most people don't know how to record properly with compression, so they can tend to overcompress a lot of times, and you can't really remove that from the recording. So this is a good plugin to kind of help if you don't um understand how to record without compression. And also, if you do understand how to record without compression, but um, you don't have time to do, you know, some vocal writing and gain changing um, while you're in the mix or in the recording process, because a lot of times the artist is trying to go and they want to stay in that moment. So you have to be very mindful of that. So that's what the whole template thing is for, to be able to increase your workflow and to be efficient. So uh, use this carefully if you do decide to use this. Now you'll see I have all of these tracks labeled lead one, lead two, um, and going to recording buses. So lead one is going to the lead bus, and the lead bus, the output goes into a verse bus. So I have pretty much the same chain on the verse bus, but you'll see they're inactive, and that's because I don't need to have these activated unless I'm just deciding to do a quick, just bring everything into the same bus. But I have the reverb on here because it affects everything under there, your lead and your ad libs. So it's just a quick, efficient way of working. If you want, you can always just copy the reverb down here, and you don't have to even use the verse bus. You can just change the output into going to your regular output. whether it be output 1 2, analog 1 2, whatever the case may be. Um, so one thing I try to do when I record, and this is another thing that's good about this PAS analyzer, is when I record, I try to keep my levels around -12, anywhere from -12 to no more than -6. That's, to me, I consider that a fairly large range, especially when recording vocals. But -6 is pretty much like my threshold. I very much try not to go past that point. I would consider that extremely hot for recording vocals. But usually, if you can keep it in that range, you should be okay. You should be safe. Um, just use your ears at the end of the day. That's what matters most. If it sounds good, that's what it's about. Don't overthink it. But these are just some guidelines that I have in terms of maintaining headroom and keeping your levels in check. So your gain staging is working properly for you. Um, Another thing I forgot to mention too, in regards to gain staging and headroom, is the 2 track has a trim plug on there, which is at -9.8 dB. A lot of times I actually run it to -10.8, and the reason I do this is because whenever you get an instrumental, I don't want to say whenever you get an instrumental, but most times when you're receiving a beat or an instrumental, there's limiting on there, and that's to make it loud so it can match up with most of the stuff, and prevent from distorting as well. So a lot of the times, young engineers, um, instead of turning the instrumental down or the beat down, what they end up doing is they turn the vocals up and to try to match the instrumental and to be able to, you know, sit, in the mix. But what ultimately ends up happening is they end up recording their vocals way too loud because the beat is already extremely loud because it's right up there pushing up against zero. It's up against the limiter the whole time. So what you want to do is you want to bring that down. And what I do is I bring that down, 10.8, and then I have a trim plugin on the master fader, which is at 6 plus 6. So now, if you end up clipping, you still want to try to avoid clipping during your recording process. But if you do end up clipping temporarily here or there, you still have about a good 5 or 4 dB. Depending how much over you're clipping, obviously. Um, but it's a good way to be able to maintain headroom um, during the recording process and make sure that you know you're not just making stuff loud. But yeah, so back to the lead. The lead is going into this lead bus, obviously here, and here I have. I'm gonna show you the chain. Um, First thing is exciter. Um, if you don't want to use an exciter, sometimes I might use a saturation plug-in here. And with this, I'm using the Aphex Vintage Oral Exciter. You have to be very careful with this. Once you start going past +4 on the AX mix, um, it's very bright and sometimes it can be harsh. So just be mindful of how hard you're pushing this, especially with female vocalists. Um, it's a real good plugin for brightening and giving some extra life to your vocal, but just be very mindful of how it behaves and reacts, because in that first 4 dB, it's not the same, or that first +4, but then once you start going over it, the exciter starts behaving differently. Um, from there, I'm going into a gate, and I have the gate set very low. It's it's one of those things that's set up if you're not in an ideal recording environment, and if you don't know how to use a gate properly, I would probably sidestep this. But I have it set up so you can just automatically turn it on, and it shouldn't affect you because it's at such a low level that it's only there to remove like any kind of rumble or floor noise that might be in between uh words or takes. And so, but it's useful. It'll help you, save you some time in regards to if you're having to edit some of that stuff out. From there, it's going into EQ, and this is a cutting EQ. uh I do have a slight boost around upper 7K, and that's a real gentle broad boost. That's um just give it a little touch more brightness, cutting off some of that low end rumble that's going to be in your vocal. And then going into a compressor, and you can see I'm very much into the less is more. So um, I like to record either between two, with my ratio between 2 and 3 to 1, and I try to get about 2 to 3 dB a gain reduction, maybe 4 sometimes, depending. Um, but yeah, I like to go very light and transparent. But the key is always use your ears. Um, you know, things change. Every song is different. This is a template set up to help you get into your workflow fast. This isn't There's no magical preset to make anything sound golden. That's one thing that uh, you learn as you go along in your engineering. There's no magical preset. There's nothing to make anything automatically everything sound good if I use this. No, it does nothing work. Every song is different. Everything behaves and moves and reacts differently. So that's just something to keep in mind. But that's the compressor I like to use. You can change the modes on here. Uh, this is the most transparent, these settings that I have. If you go into an electro and to warm, it adds more, I would say, in the lower mid harmonics, and as opposed to this is just very much a very transparent compressor where uh, it's not adding as much harmonics or saturation in there. That's another thing to keep in mind when you're using your compressor is you try to use your compressor for tone more so than dynamic control. Um, when you use it for dynamic control purely, things get a little wonky. But really, the thing that most people like about compressors is the warmth that it brings, and that's through harmonics. Um, the next compressor in this stage is the RVox. This is a compressor. This is like an upward compressor. I don't know necessarily how to describe this, but it's great for bringing presence to your vocal. Anytime I feel like I need to push my vocal up a little bit more to give it more of a forward presence, this is usually the compressor that I like to go for. And I have RS 127 box at the end to add some top end. This is a great plugin for adding top end without being harsh. I don't know how they did it, but it's beautifully made plugin. Very simple controls, but it's just very very beautiful, and you'll hear the difference right away as soon as you put it on there. Um, And I have there's some other plugins that I have deactivated. Um, this is REQ. It's a little boost that I have around 8K. Uh, Sometimes vocalists are flat, so it's just something another EQ to have if you need. Um, and then also I have a compressor afterward, which I deactivated, but um, it's good to have sometimes a compressor coming in if you do some excuse me, if you do some boosting on your EQ, a lot of times it's good to have a compressor afterwards to kind of tame it back and bring back the balance across the frequency spectrum. So sometimes I have it there. It's just there if you need be, um, if you need it. And last but not least, another inactive plugin. Um, and this is very much I use this a lot in my mixing process is I'll put a L1 towards the end of my chain, and it works in the same a lot in the same manner as the RVox, except it just has a little bit more control. Um, you can direct exactly what level you wanted to bring it up to, and it works exactly like any other limiter. Um, you have your release time, which you can control, and it helps to make it more transparent. If I have a longer release time, um, the limiter is not going to be as active, and it's not going to be working as hard. It's not going to be, you know, it's not going to be moving as fast. It's going to be a smoother, more transparent sound. Um, but keeping that in mind, that's also dependent upon how hard you push the threshold. If I'm getting 5 dB of gain reduction, or excuse me, of attenuation, um, you know, same thing is you're gonna hear it pumping, but it'll just be more transparent when you do it in a more moderate fashion, as I should say. Um, and then here we'll go through some of these sends that I have. The harmonizer that I have set up is basically um, pretty much straight up stole it from Pensado. Um, it's a great thing to add body and depth for your vocals quickly, and it'll actually give you some width as well too. So doubler, EQ, stereo imager, pretty basic stuff. Um, and then I also have all of the sends down here. I have 3 different reverbs, uh, 2 or 4 different delays. One is a filter delay for each speed. Um, a short delay. I have a slap delay as well. A flange and a distortion. I rarely use the distortion. The distortion is more like a parallel compression chain actually, because if you're using it, well, for me that's how I like to use it. I use it more like a parallel compressor, but I think of it as a parallel saturator. Um, but yeah, you have that and a flanger, which can be cool sometimes for adding some width and you know adding some sparkle a little bit. Actually, it's weird how it works. You don't want to use it too much, but if you do use it, just use it subtly, and you'll be surprised sometimes. Sometimes it'll work for you, sometimes it won't. Um, but it's just one of the tools that I use, and I like to have it in there just in case I need it. Even if it's rare, I know it can be useful when the occasion is right. So I think that almost covers it. Pretty much these hook tracks are set up the same. They're all going to the recording bus. These are the main hook ones, or hook 1 and hook 2. and then the rest are going to hook background vocals. I do have the hook background vocals going into back into the hook bus. That's so I could just have an overall blend. But if you want to separate those, all you have to do is just, you know, put it to, send it to the main output, and it should be all right. Um, Another thing, last thing, I have an ad lib track set up, and it's using the Flux box from its McDSP. And this is pretty much, a little ad lib uh, tracks when person is kind of responding or talking back, like a call and response type deal. So here I have two different distortions set up. One's a walkie-talkie, and the other is a megaphone, but they all have similar kind of effect in terms of like that telephone kind of voice, and also the EQ to go after it. And this will take out a lot of that low end unnecessary rumble that you're not going to need. And if you want, you can activate. I have a half note delay um, that you can activate, and it's set up so it's panned to the left. So when the ad lib comes out the right, the delay will come out the left, and it gives it kind of a call and response type feel. I wouldn't recommend putting all these plugins on while you're recording just to reduce latency. A lot of times, depending where I'm recording at, I may deactivate some of these plugins um, just to kind of help uh, reduce latency, or any kind of playback issues um, that the artist might have to deal with while they're recording. So again, what I'll do is I'll make this available on my website. Try to make it available for download for $9.99, and I'm going to put up another tutorial soon with a stock plugin template. And what I'll do is I'll actually make that available for free, and I'll try to walk you through it, and it'll be in a similar manner, a similar setup as this template, but it'll be using all stock plugins from Pro Tools and the Air plugins that come with Pro Tools. So hopefully this was useful for you. And if you guys got any questions, suggestions, feel free to give me a shout at Ben Wogu on all social media. All right, peace.